They say revenge is a dish best served cold. The Galactic Empire was about to learn that human revenge burns hotter than a collapsing star, and it doesn't wait for anyone's convenience. When Marcus and Elena Chun stepped onto that execution platform, the Empire thought they were silencing two insignificant rebels. What they didn't know was that they had just lit the fuse on humanity's most dangerous weapon, love backed by an entire species that doesn't know when to quit. 47 minutes. That's all it took for two grieving parents, a hidden AI, and a secret that could shatter the galaxy to turn the most powerful empire in known space into cosmic dust. The Empire made one fatal mistake. They assumed humans would mourn like every other species they'd conquered. They were wrong. Humans don't mourn. They plan. They prepare. And when they strike back, entire civilizations remember why Earth's children carry the stars in their eyes and fire in their hearts. This is the story of the day the galaxy learned that there are fates far worse than death, and that humanity's greatest strength isn't their technology, their weapons, or their numbers. It's that they never, ever forgive those who harm their family. The execution plaza on 3 Nox Prime stretched like a metallic cancer across the planet's surface, its obsidian stones polished to mirror perfection by the blood of 1,000 martyrs. Today, those stones would taste human blood for the first time, and Emperor Valdresketh personally intended to savor every moment of it. Marcus Chun stood with his back straight, his weathered hands bound behind him with energy shackles that hummed with lethal voltage. Beside him, his wife Elena maintained the same defiant posture, her silver-streaked hair catching the light of 3 alien suns. They had been stripped of their rebel uniforms and dressed in the traditional gray robes of the condemned, but no amount of imperial ceremony could diminish the fire that still burned in their eyes. The crowd of alien spectators filled every available space around the plaza. Thranoxians with their crystalline exoskeletons clicked approval, while the slug-like Mortari oozed closer for better views. Representatives from dozens of conquered species had gathered to witness this historic moment, the execution of the first humans to dare challenge the Galactic Empire's authority. Citizens of the Empire, Emperor Valdresketh's voice boomed across the plaza through translation devices embedded in every surface. His massive form, easily 3 meters tall and covered in the ritual scars of his warrior caste, dominated the raised platform. Today we close the book on the brief, violent chapter of human rebellion. Marcus felt Elena's fingers brush against his through their bonds. 43 years of marriage had created a connection that needed no words. They both knew this moment had been inevitable from the day they chose to stand against the Empire. They both knew their deaths would accomplish something their lives could not. The Emperor gestured toward a massive holographic display that materialized above the plaza. Images of burning imperial stations, destroyed fleets, and liberated colonies cycled through the air. These terrorists, he continued, his voice dripping with manufactured disgust, believed their primitive species could challenge 10,000 years of imperial order. Today, we correct their delusion. In the crowd, Ambassador THYSS of the Nexarian Collective leaned toward her aide. Her serpentine features showed the barest hint of concern. The humans have been remarkably quiet since their capture. No rescue attempts, no desperate transmissions. It troubles me. Her aide, a younger Nexarian whose scales still held their juvenile brightness, flickered his tongue nervously. Perhaps they finally understand the futility of resistance. THYSS had lived through 17 different species and corporations into the Empire. She had seen defiance in many forms, but human defiance had always carried a particular intensity that made her skin crawl. "No," she whispered. "They're planning something." On the execution platform, Marcus allowed himself one last look at the stars visible through the atmospheric dome. Earth was somewhere out there, hidden in a sector the Empire hadn't yet located. His son David was out there too, hopefully continuing the work that had brought Marcus and Elena to this place. "Any last words?" Emperor Valdresketh asked, though his tone suggested he hoped for silence. Elena spoke first, her voice carrying clearly across the plaza without any assistance from the translation devices. "You think killing us ends something? You're wrong. It begins everything." Marcus nodded slowly. "My wife speaks truth. You've built this empire on fear, on the belief that crushing resistance quickly prevents larger uprisings. But you've never faced humans before. The Emperor's laugh rumbled like distant thunder. Your species numbers barely 12 billion. The Empire controls 40,000 worlds. Your mathematics are as flawed as your courage. Numbers aren't everything, Marcus replied. You'll learn that soon enough. The executioner stepped forward, a towering Krillian whose 4 arms each held a different ceremonial weapon. The Empire always made executions into theatrical displays, choosing methods that would resonate with the condemned psychology. For humans, they had selected an ancient Earth weapon, a projectile firearm that would remind the victims of their planet's violent history. Marcus and Elena were forced to their knees. The energy shackles shifted to hold them upright, while leaving their hearts exposed. Traditional imperial execution protocol demanded that condemned criminals face their deaths looking at the representatives of the species they had wronged. As the executioner raised his weapon, Elena closed her eyes and thought of their son David. At 28, he had inherited his father's strategic mind and his mother's unwavering determination. More importantly, he had inherited something neither parent had possessed at his age: absolute certainty that the Empire could be defeated. The projectile tore through Elena's chest first, her body jerking forward before the energy shackles caught her weight. She remained upright, blood spreading across the gray execution robes, but her eyes found Marcus's one last time. The message passed between them was simple and complete. It's done. Marcus's execution followed immediately, the impact spinning him partially around before the shackles corrected his position. His last conscious thought was satisfaction. Everything had proceeded exactly according to plan. Emperor Valdresketh raised his arms in triumph as the bodies slumped forward in their restraints. Let this be recorded across every world. Humanity's rebellion dies with these terrorists. The Empire endures. The crowd erupted in cheers, clicks, and various alien expressions of approval. The Nexarian ambassador THYSS was notably silent, her scaled features twisted with growing unease. She had noticed something the others had missed. Neither human had shown the slightest trace of fear during their final moments. As the Imperial Broadcasting Network transmitted images of the execution to thousands of worlds, cleanup crews began preparing the plaza for the celebratory ceremony scheduled to follow. The Empire had protocols for everything, including the proper disposal of rebel corpses. What none of them realized was that Marcus and Elena Chun had spent the last 6 months of their imprisonment carefully planning every detail of their deaths. The location, the timing, the method, even the Emperor's presence, all of it had been orchestrated through carefully planted intelligence and strategic surrenders. The execution itself was not an ending. It was a trigger. 3-star systems away, aboard the salvage ship, Dutiful Scavenger, Captain David Chun received a coded transmission exactly 47 minutes after his parents' execution. The message was simple, 2 words in his mother's handwriting, transmitted through quantum encryption methods the Empire's intelligence services had never encountered. Phoenix Protocol. David closed his eyes and allowed himself exactly 60 seconds of grief. His parents had raised him to understand that in war, even the deepest love sometimes required impossible sacrifices. They had chosen their fate to ensure humanity's future, and he would not dishonor that choice with excessive mourning. When he opened his eyes, they held the same fire that had burned in Marcus and Elena Chun during their final moments. But where his parents' fire had been tempered by years of careful resistance, David's burned with the pure intensity of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. "Arya," he said to the empty bridge, "initiate Phoenix Protocol. Authorization Chun Delta 77. The ship's AI, humanity's most closely guarded secret, materialized as a hologram beside his command chair. Arya had been built using technology that predated human spaceflight, reverse-engineered from artifacts discovered in Earth's deepest ocean trenches. The Empire had no idea such an AI existed, much less that it had been analyzing their civilization for over 2 decades. Phoenix Protocol initiated, David, Arya replied, her voice carrying unusual emotional resonance. "I'm sorry about Marcus and Elena. They were good people. They were warriors," David corrected gently. "And now it's time to finish what they started. across human space. The signal propagated through quantum communication networks that existed beneath the Empire's detection threshold. On remote mining stations, in hidden colonies, aboard ships flying false registry numbers, the message reached thousands of human ears simultaneously. Phoenix Protocol wasn't just a signal. It was a declaration of war unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The Empire had made a fundamental error in their understanding of human psychology. They believed that removing leadership would cripple resistance movements, just as it had with every other species they'd conquered. They didn't understand that human resistance movements were deliberately designed to become more dangerous when their leaders were eliminated. Marcus and Elena Chun had never been the true commanders of the human rebellion. They had been its most visible faces, carefully positioned to draw Imperial attention away from the real preparations taking place in the shadows. Their capture and execution had been the final step in a plan that encompassed not just military strategy, but the complete psychological destruction of the Empire itself. As news of Phoenix Protocol spread through hidden human networks, weapons caches were opened, sleeper agents activated, and plans that had been years in the making finally set into motion. But the most devastating weapon humanity was about to unleash wasn't technological. It was the simple, terrible truth about what the Empire had done to earn humanity's attention in the first place. On Threenox Prime, the celebration continued well into the night cycle. Emperor Valdersketh had retired to his private chambers, confident that the execution had served its purpose of intimidating potential rebels throughout the galaxy. The plaza had been cleared, the bodies removed, and normal Imperial routine had resumed. None of them noticed the small device that Elena Chun had somehow managed to place beneath the execution platform during her final moments. It was smaller than a grain of sand, invisible to all, but the most sophisticated scanning equipment, and it had been quietly recording everything that happened for the past 6 months. More importantly, it had been broadcasting that information through quantum channels that the Empire's technology couldn't intercept or decode. Somewhere in the depths of space, that information was being compiled, analyzed, and prepared for distribution across every communication network in the galaxy. Not just human networks, every network. The Empire was about to learn that their greatest weakness had always been the same thing that made them powerful: their absolute control over information. When humans decided to share what they had learned about the Empire's true nature, no force in the galaxy would be able to stop the truth from reaching every conquered species, every oppressed world, and every enslaved population that had spent generations dreaming of freedom. The execution of Marcus and Elena Chun had taken exactly 11 minutes and 37 seconds. The revolution that would destroy the Galactic Empire had precisely 47 minutes and 23 seconds remaining before it began. Aboard the Imperial Dreadnought, Eternal Dominion, Fleet Admiral Zephys Morgoth reviewed the execution footage for the 7th time. Something about the human's behavior continued to gnaw at his tactical instincts. Instincts that had served him well through 3 centuries of military service and dozens of species pacifications. Computer, analyze final facial expressions of executed subjects. Compare with behavioral patterns of other species facing imminent termination. The ship's AI processed the request with mechanical efficiency. Analysis complete. Human subjects displayed 73% less fear response than average. Stress indicators were within normal ranges. Conclusion: subjects appeared to be following a predetermined plan. Admiral Morgoth's scales shifted from their usual blue to a concerned purple. As a draconic, his species had evolved sophisticated threat assessment capabilities. The human's calm acceptance of death triggered every predator instinct he possessed. Pull all intelligence reports on human psychology and warfare patterns. I want everything we have on their historical conflicts, particularly their response to leadership elimination. While the Admiral delved into human history, the quantum device Elena Chun had planted continued its silent work. Its quantum entanglement communication system operated on principles the Empire's greatest scientists had dismissed as impossible. Instantaneous information transfer across unlimited distances without any detectable transmission medium. The device was not just recording. It was learning, mapping the Empire's entire communication network through passive analysis of the Threenox Prime Command Center. Every military frequency, Every diplomatic channel, every emergency protocol was being quietly cataloged and prepared for humanity's use. On the agricultural world of Verdana, Korth Millwright was 3 hours into his work shift when his concealed quantum receiver activated. The massive, peaceful Korgan had spent 15 years working imperial farms, sending half his earnings to his family on his enslaved homeworld while carefully observing imperial logistics and food distribution systems. The Phoenix Protocol message appeared as text across his retinal implant. Execute Phase 7. Agricultural disruption authorized. Minimize civilian casualties. Korth set down his harvesting tools and walked calmly toward the facility's central processing center. Along the way, 12 other seemingly random farm workers received similar signals and began moving with identical purpose. They had all been waiting for this moment, preparing for it during years of seemingly mundane agricultural labor. The Verdana Food Processing Facility supplied nutrition bars for 17 Imperial battle fleets and 43 military installations. Its destruction would force the Empire to reorganize supply chains across 3 entire sectors. But, more importantly, it would demonstrate humanity's ability to strike at targets the Empire considered completely secure. Korth reached the main processing center and input a routine maintenance code he'd memorized years earlier. The massive Korgan's natural strength, combined with careful preparation, allowed him to manually override safety systems that should have been impossible for one person to compromise. "Hey, Korth," called Supervisor Yellis, a thin-limbed Nexarian who had always treated the alien workers with reasonable respect. "What are you doing in the processing center? Your shift is in Section 7 today." Korth turned, his expression genuinely apologetic. "I am sorry, Yellis. This isn't about you personally. You've been fair to us." He gestured toward the evacuation alarms he had just activated. "You have approximately 8 minutes to get everyone out of the facility before the core processors overload." Yellis stared at him in confusion. "What are you talking about? The processors can't overload. They have 17 different safety systems." "They did have 17 safety systems," Korth corrected gently. "We've been studying them for 6 years. We know how to disable everyone." As evacuation alarms wailed across the facility, similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. Human sleeper agents, many of whom had spent decades establishing cover identities and gaining access to critical infrastructure, received their activation codes simultaneously. The strikes were precisely calibrated. No direct attacks on civilian populations, no destruction that couldn't be repaired within reasonable time frames, but absolutely devastating impacts on military logistics and imperial authority. Fuel depots, communication arrays, weapon manufacturing facilities, administrative centers, all targeted with surgical precision by people who had spent years learning exactly how to cause maximum disruption. On Nexus Station, humanity's most audacious infiltration was reaching its culmination. Dr. Sarah Chun, David's younger sister, and arguably the most brilliant xenobiologist of her generation, had spent 3 years working in the Empire's Central Genetic Research Facility under the identity of Dr. Siladarn, a supposedly minor Nexarian researcher studying adaptive genetics in conquered populations. The real Dr. Siladarn had died in a shuttle accident 2 weeks before beginning her assignment at Nexus Station. Sarah had undergone extensive surgical modification to match the deceased Nexarian's physical characteristics, then spent months studying Nexarian culture, language patterns, and social behaviors until her disguise was functionally perfect. Her Phoenix Protocol mission was the most critical of all, accessing the Empire's biological warfare research and discovering exactly what they had been planning to do to conquered populations who showed signs of resistance. Sarah's quantum communicator activated as she stood before the most secure biological database in the galaxy. The message was brief. "Go loud, sister. Make them pay for what they did to Mom and Dad." She input her access codes, carefully gathered through months of observing her colleagues' security procedures, and began downloading files that would reveal the Empire's most horrific secrets. But she didn't stop there. Sarah Chun had inherited her family's gift for strategic thinking, and she had prepared something special for this moment. Using her advanced knowledge of biological systems, she had spent months creating a computer virus designed specifically to target the Empire's biological research databases. Not to destroy them, but to modify them in subtle ways that would render years of research useless while appearing to be normal system degradation. More importantly, the virus would slowly corrupt the genetic locks that prevented the Empire's biological weapons from affecting their own species. Within a year, any attempt to deploy biological warfare against conquered populations would result in those same weapons targeting Imperial species with equal lethality. As the virus uploaded itself into the Empire's systems, Sarah allowed herself a moment of savage satisfaction. Her parents had raised her to value life, to seek peaceful solutions whenever possible. But they had also raised her to understand that some evils could only be stopped through decisive action. The Empire had been developing biological weapons specifically designed to target human genetic markers. They planned to simply exterminate humanity rather than waste resources on conventional warfare. Sarah's modifications would ensure that their own weapons would turn against them, and the evidence she was stealing would prove their genocidal intentions to every species in the galaxy. Meanwhile, aboard the dutiful Scavenger, Arya was orchestrating the most complex information warfare operation in galactic history. Using quantum entanglement networks that existed beneath Imperial detection, she was coordinating the actions of thousands of human agents while simultaneously analyzing every piece of data being gathered about Imperial operations. David, she reported, preliminary intelligence from Nexus Station confirms our worst fears about Imperial biological weapons research. They weren't planning conventional conquest. They were planning species-specific genocide for any population showing resistance potential. David Chen's expression hardened. How many species were targeted? 47 confirmed, with preliminary research on hundreds more. The humans were first on the list due to our successful early resistance operations, but every species showing adaptation potential was scheduled for elimination. And our people have evidence, complete documentation, including communication records showing direct orders from Emperor Valdersketh himself. Sarah has also introduced corrupted data into their biological weapons systems that will render them useless and potentially dangerous to Imperial species. David nodded grimly. Then, it's time for Phase 2. Arya, open channels to every resistance movement we've identified in the past 20 years. Not just the active ones, all of them. Even the groups that have been dormant or defeated. David, that's over 3,000 different organizations across 1,200 worlds. Many of them have good reasons to distrust humans, and some of them might be Imperial intelligence operations. I know, but our parents died to give us this opportunity, and we're not going to waste it by being cautious. Send them everything we've gathered about Imperial biological weapons research. Send them everything we've learned about Imperial control methods, administrative weaknesses, and military vulnerabilities. Send them everything. Arya's holographic form flickered with what might have been concern. That level of intelligence sharing will make humanity's techniques available to every resistance movement in the galaxy. Some of them might eventually use that knowledge against human interests. David stared out at the stars through the bridge viewport. Arya, do you know why the Empire has never faced a coordinated galactic resistance movement? Information control. They prevent different resistance groups from communicating with each other, ensuring that no single organization can grow large enough to threaten Imperial control. Exactly. And they've been successful because every species has been primarily concerned with their own liberation. But humans aren't primarily concerned with human liberation. We're concerned with justice. I'm not sure I understand the distinction. David turned back to the AI, his expression carrying the same quiet intensity his parents had shown during their final moments. Justice means that what happened to humanity, what the Empire planned to do to us, can never happen to anyone else. Liberation means freeing yourself. Justice means ensuring that your oppressors can never oppress anyone else. And you believe other species will understand that distinction? I believe other species will recognize the truth when they see it. We're not offering them human leadership or human solutions. We're offering them human information, gathered at human cost, so they can make their own decisions about their futures. Arya processed this for several microseconds, a lengthy consideration by AI standards. The Empire will retaliate massively when they realize the scope of what we're doing. Of course they will. They'll abandon all pretense of benevolent rule and reveal themselves as the genocidal tyranny they've always been. And when that happens, every species in the galaxy will understand exactly what they're fighting for. As Arya began transmitting terabytes of intelligence data to resistance movements across the galaxy, the quantum device on 3 Prime finally completed its primary mission. For 6 months, it had been recording not just communications and tactical information, but the personal conversations of Imperial leadership. The device had captured Emperor Valdrisketh's private discussions about the final solution to the resistance problem. It had recorded Admiral Morgoth's casual conversations about the most effective ways to terrorize civilian populations. It had documented hundreds of Imperial officials discussing conquered species as if they were livestock to be managed rather than sentient beings deserving of basic rights. Most damning of all, it had recorded the Emperor's reaction to the biological weapons reports. His exact words, preserved in perfect detail. Excellent. Begin with the humans, then proceed systematically through every species showing intelligence levels above subsistence requirements. The galaxy will be much easier to administer when populated only by species incapable of organized resistance. That recording, along with thousands of others, was about to be broadcast simultaneously across every communication network in the galaxy. Not through Imperial channels, which could be controlled or censored, but through quantum entanglement networks that would reach every world instantaneously and without any possibility of interception. The Emperor's own words would condemn him before representatives of every species the Empire claimed to protect. On 3 Prime, Fleet Admiral Morgoth had completed his analysis of human warfare patterns. What he found in the historical records filled him with a dread that his species' evolution had specifically designed to prevent. Humans did not fight like any other species the Empire had encountered. When their leaders were killed, they did not seek accommodation or surrender. They became more violent, more unpredictable, and more willing to accept massive casualties in pursuit of victory. When faced with overwhelming force, they did not submit. They found ways to turn that force against itself. Most terrifying of all, humans appeared to be capable of genuine long-term strategic thinking that encompassed decades of preparation for conflicts they expected to face in the future. The calm acceptance Marcus and Elena Chun had shown during their execution suddenly made perfect sense. They had not been defeated. They had been completing a mission. Computer, open an emergency channel to Emperor Valdrisketh. Priority Alpha classification. Channel opened. Admiral, Your Majesty, I have reason to believe the human execution was not an ending, but a beginning. We need to implement maximum security protocols immediately. Emperor Valdrisketh's massive form appeared on the communication screen, his ritual scars seeming to writhe in the dim lighting of his private chambers. Admiral, you're allowing yourself to be intimidated by the desperate actions of a dying species. The humans are finished. Sir, with respect, I've analyzed their historical warfare patterns. When humans lose leaders to enemy action, they do not seek peace. They seek revenge, and they're very good at it. The Emperor's laugh rumbled across the communication link. Admiral, I appreciate your caution, but the mathematics are simple. 12 billion humans cannot threaten an empire of 40,000 worlds. Their rebellion dies with their leaders. Sir, what if their leaders weren't really their leaders? What if Marcus and Elena Chund were deliberately positioned to draw our attention while their real leadership remained hidden? For the first time, Emperor Valdrisketh's expression showed uncertainty. Explain. Human warfare doctrine emphasizes redundancy and adaptation. They specifically plan for the loss of visible leadership. Sir, I believe we may have just triggered exactly the response they wanted us to trigger. The communication link suddenly filled with static. Then, clear as starlight, a human voice spoke in perfect Imperial standard. Your Majesty, we need to talk. Emperor Valdrisketh stared at the communication screen in disbelief. The security protocols around his private chambers were supposedly impenetrable, protected by technology that had taken the Empire's greatest minds centuries to develop. No unauthorized signal should have been able to reach him, much less override an active connection with his fleet admiral. Who is this? He demanded, though something in his predatory instincts already suspected the answer. My name is David Chun, the voice replied with calm formality. Son of Marcus and Elena Chun, whom you murdered approximately 47 minutes ago. Admiral Morgatha's scales shifted to deep purple, the draconic equivalent of terror. Impossible. Our communication arrays detect no incoming transmissions. This signal isn't coming through any known technology. David's voice carried a hint of amusement. Admiral Morgath, I presume? Your species developed excellent threat assessment capabilities. You should listen to those instincts more carefully. The Emperor's massive frame tensed, ritual scars darkening with rage. Human, you will explain how you've penetrated Imperial security, or we will extract the information from what remains of your species. I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding, David replied. You seem to believe you're in a position to make demands. You're not. In approximately 37 minutes, every communication network in this galaxy is going to receive a very interesting broadcast. I thought you might prefer to hear about it privately first. Fleet Admiral Morgath activated his personal tactical display, searching for any sign of human ships or installations within communication range of 3 Nox Prime. The sensor showed nothing unusual, no vessels, no transmission sources, no indication of how this conversation was even possible. Computer, he commanded, trace origin of current communication signal. Unable to comply. No incoming signal detected. Current communication appears to be originating from within Imperial systems. The Admiral's threat assessment capabilities scream danger. A species capable of infiltrating Imperial communication systems at this level possessed technology far more advanced than intelligence reports had indicated. Emperor Valdresketh leaned forward, his massive form dominating the screen. What broadcast? Oh, several actually, David replied conversationally. The first will be recordings of your private conversations over the past 6 months, particularly the ones discussing genocide as an administrative convenience. The second will be complete documentation of your biological weapons research, including your plans for species-specific extermination of any population showing resistance potential. The Emperor's ritual scars went completely black, a sign of absolute fury in his species. Impossible. Our biological research is classified beyond your primitive intelligence capabilities. My sister Sarah would disagree. Dr. Sarah Chun, though you knew her as Dr. Siladarn. She's been working in your Nexus Station research facility for 3 years, and she's been very thorough in her data collection. Admiral Morgatha's tactical display suddenly lit up with emergency signals from across the Empire. Verdana Food Processing Center destroyed. 3 military supply depots on Korthax Prime offline. Communication arrays on 17 different worlds reporting systematic failures. Fuel depot explosions on 12 Imperial Navy bases. Your Majesty, the Admiral interrupted, we're receiving reports of coordinated attacks across multiple sectors. Precision strikes on logistics and infrastructure targets. David's voice continued with the same calm tone. Admiral, you're looking at approximately 30% of the attacks. The others won't be reported for several hours because they've targeted the communication systems that would normally carry those reports. How many of our people? The Emperor demanded. Fewer than 100 Imperial casualties so far. We've been very careful about civilian populations. This isn't about killing your people, Your Majesty. It's about demonstrating that your empire is not as secure as you believed. The Emperor stood, his 3-meter frame radiating the kind of controlled violence that had allowed his species to dominate dozens of worlds. Human, you have made the worst mistake in your species' history. When we locate your homeworld, we will make your extinction a public spectacle that will be remembered for millennia. Actually, David replied, that brings me to the third part of our broadcast. You see, we've also been studying your psychology, Your Majesty. We know exactly how you'll respond to this conversation. Emperor Valdresketh felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Explain. In approximately 15 minutes, you're going to order the immediate deployment of biological weapons against human targets. You'll believe this demonstrates Imperial strength and decisiveness. You'll be wrong. Admiral Morgatha's display showed new intelligence arriving from Nexus Station. His expression shifted to something approaching panic as he read the reports. Your Majesty, we have a problem with the biological weapon systems. What kind of problem? According to Nexus Station, someone has been systematically corrupting the genetic targeting algorithms for the past several months. The weapons that were designed to target human genetics have been modified to target multiple species simultaneously, including our own. David's voice carried genuine satisfaction. My sister is very good at her job. She's also been documenting every aspect of your biological weapons program for the past 3 years. The evidence will be comprehensive. The Emperor's rage was building toward the kind of explosive violence his species was notorious for. You think you've cleverly sabotaged our weapons? We have conventional fleets that will reduce your worlds to molten slag. Yes, you do, David agreed. And when you deploy them against civilian human targets, every species in this galaxy will see exactly what kind of empire they've been living under. They'll understand that today's genocide against humans is tomorrow's genocide against them. They'll understand that resistance is futile, the Emperor corrected. Your Majesty, may I ask how many successful galactic revolutions you've studied? The question was so unexpected that the Emperor actually paused. What? Galactic revolutions. Multi-species uprisings against imperial authority. How many historical examples are you familiar with? Admiral Morgoth answered instead. There have been none. No imperial authority in galactic history has faced coordinated resistance from multiple species simultaneously. Exactly, David said. And do you know why? Because it's impossible, the Emperor replied. Different species have different goals, different capabilities, different psychology. They can't maintain coordination over the timescales required for effective resistance. Wrong. It's because no imperial authority has ever been stupid enough to demonstrate their genocidal intentions this clearly to this many species at the same time. The communication screens throughout the Emperor's chambers suddenly activated simultaneously. Instead of showing David Chen's image, they displayed a compilation of the Empire's own internal communications. The Emperor's own voice filled the chamber. Excellent. Begin with the humans, then proceed systematically through every species showing intelligence levels above subsistence requirements. The galaxy will be much easier to administer when populated only by species incapable of organized resistance. Admiral Morgoth stared at the recording in horror. Sir, is this genuine? Of course it's genuine, the Emperor snapped. It was a private conversation about long-term administrative efficiency. Your Majesty, David's voice interrupted. That recording is currently being broadcast to every communication network in the galaxy, along with similar recordings from hundreds of imperial officials discussing the most efficient ways to commit genocide. The implications hit Admiral Morgoth first. As a military strategist, he understood exactly what this meant. Your Majesty, every resistance movement in the galaxy is going to receive proof that the Empire plans to exterminate them regardless of their current cooperation level. So, sir, that removes their primary incentive for maintaining peaceful relationships with imperial authority. If they're going to be eliminated anyway, they have nothing to lose by fighting. David's voice carried a note of respect for the Admiral's understanding. Very good, Admiral. You're beginning to grasp the strategic situation. Emperor Valder's Keth's rage finally exploded. I don't care about the strategic situation. We have 40,000 worlds and the most powerful military force in galactic history. We will crush any resistance that emerges from this pathetic human propaganda. And every act of violence you commit will be recorded and broadcast in real time, David replied calmly. Every civilian casualty, every destroyed city, every act of imperial brutality will be seen by every species in the galaxy simultaneously. You'll be providing the evidence that proves our point. The Emperor's communication screens shifted again, now showing real-time footage from across the galaxy. On Corthan Prime, massive crowds of the normally docile Courthanes were gathering in public squares, listening to human broadcasts about Imperial biological weapons research. On Nexus Station, Nexarian officials were demanding immediate access to the biological research data to verify the claims for themselves. Most shocking of all, on a dozen Imperial core worlds, non-human populations were beginning to organize demonstrations demanding transparency about Imperial policies toward conquered species. This is impossible, the Emperor whispered. These species have been pacified for generations. They've been waiting, David corrected. Every conquered species has been waiting for someone to prove that resistance was possible. We're not trying to lead a galactic revolution, Your Majesty. We're just providing the information that allows every species to make their own decisions about their futures. Admiral Morgoth's tactical displays were lighting up with new reports every few seconds. Not just attacks on Imperial installations, but massive civilian demonstrations, communication intercepts suggesting coordination between previously unconnected resistance movements, and, most alarming of all, defections among non-human Imperial military units. "Sir," he reported grimly, "we're looking at the beginning of a coordinated galactic uprising. Multiple species, multiple sectors, with access to intelligence about our operations that should have been impossible for them to obtain." Emperor Valdresketh stared at the displays, showing Imperial authority crumbling across dozens of worlds simultaneously. "Ow!" David's voice carried a note of something that might have been pity. "Your Majesty, did you really think that humans were the only species capable of strategic thinking? The only species that could maintain long-term resistance movements? The only species that valued freedom over security? You coordinated this," the Emperor accused. "We provided information. Every species involved is making their own decisions based on evidence of your genocidal intentions. We're not controlling anything, Your Majesty. We're just ensuring that when you reveal your true nature, everyone in the galaxy sees it clearly." The final pieces of the human strategy were becoming clear to Admiral Morgoth. "Sir, they've turned our response into their weapon. Every action we take to suppress these uprisings will provide evidence that supports their claims about Imperial brutality. And every action we don't take will be seen as weakness," the Emperor completed grimly. "Exactly," David confirmed. "Although there is one option you haven't considered, which is surrender." Emperor Valdresketh's roar of rage echoed through the chamber. "The Galactic Empire does not surrender to terrorists." "Then, the Galactic Empire will be destroyed by the truth," David replied with finality. "Your Majesty, my parents gave their lives to ensure that every species in this galaxy would learn what you really intended for them. They died knowing that once that truth was revealed, your empire was already finished." The communication link cut off, leaving the Emperor and Admiral staring at displays showing Imperial authority collapsing across the galaxy. In the silence that followed, Admiral Morgoth finally spoke. "Sir, we need to consider the possibility that the humans have calculated our defeat with mathematical precision." Emperor Valdresketh stared at the evidence of his empire's dissolution and felt something he had never experienced in 3 centuries of absolute power: the certainty of impending defeat. Somewhere in the void between stars, David Chun sat aboard the dutiful Scavenger and watched the galaxy tear itself free from 10,000 years of Imperial oppression. His parents had died to make this moment possible, and he intended to ensure their sacrifice would never be forgotten. "Arya," he said quietly, "begin recording. I want a complete historical record of everything that happens next. Future generations need to understand exactly how freedom was won." "Recording initiated," Arya replied. "David, your parents will be proud." "They're not gone," David replied, watching as another Imperial world declared independence on his displays. "They're in every act of resistance happening right now. They're in every species that refuses to accept oppression. They're in every person who chooses freedom over security." The revolution that had begun with 2 executions was about to remake the entire galaxy. The Imperial War Chamber on 3 Prime had never witnessed chaos on this scale. Fleet Admiral Morgoth stood before a holographic display showing the real-time collapse of Imperial authority across 40,000 worlds. Red indicators marked open rebellion, yellow showed civil unrest, and the few remaining green markers indicated systems still under nominal Imperial control. The green markers were disappearing with alarming regularity. "Report," Emperor Valdresketh commanded, his massive form rigid with barely controlled fury. 17 sectors in open revolt," Admiral Morgoth replied, his tactical training maintaining professional composure despite the magnitude of the disaster. "The Nexarian Collective has formally withdrawn from the Imperial Alliance. The Korthan Republic has declared independence. The draconic Outer Worlds are demanding immediate removal of Imperial administrative oversight. And our fleet responses?" Admiral Morgoth's scales shifted to their darkest purple. "Sir, that's where our situation becomes complicated." Emperor Valdresketh turned his full attention to the Admiral, and the weight of that gaze had reduced hardened warriors to terrified submission. Explain. The human intelligence broadcasts included detailed information about our biological weapons programs. Many of our non-human fleet crews have received evidence that their species were targeted for eventual elimination. Admiral Morgoth paused, struggling with the implications. Sir, we're experiencing widespread mutinies. The Emperor's ritual scars went completely black. How widespread? Approximately 30% of our non-human crews have either mutinied, deserted, or requested immediate transfer to defensive positions around their homeworlds. Another 20% are considered unreliable for offensive operations. Then, we use only Imperial species crews. Sir, Imperial species comprise less than 15% of our total military personnel. We simply don't have enough trusted crews to maintain offensive operations at the scale required to suppress galaxy-wide rebellion. Emperor Valdres Keth stared at the tactical displays, finally beginning to understand the true scope of the trap the humans had constructed. They planned this. All of it. Yes, sir. The human strategy appears to have been designed specifically to turn our own military structure against us. By recruiting non-human personnel into positions of critical importance, then revealing our intentions to eliminate those same species, they've created a situation where our military capability is directly proportional to the trust our crews have in our benevolence. And they've destroyed that trust. Completely, sir. The War Chamber's main communication array activated, displaying an incoming transmission request from multiple sources simultaneously. Admiral Morgoth checked the origin points and felt his threat assessment capabilities trigger maximum alert status. Sir, we're receiving a coordinated communication request from the newly declared Free World Alliance. 43 species, representing approximately 60% of the galaxy's inhabited systems. Emperor Valdres Keth's rage was building toward the explosive violence his species was famous for. They want to negotiate surrender terms. Actually, sir, they want to offer us surrender terms. The silence that followed was broken only by the low hum of the War Chamber's tactical displays. Emperor Valdres Keth had ruled the galaxy for over 2 centuries, and, in all that time, no conquered species had ever presumed to offer him terms of any kind. Accept the transmission, he commanded. The holographic display shifted to show representatives from dozens of species, all gathered in what appeared to be a massive conference facility. At the center of the group stood David Shun, his human features clearly visible among the diverse assembly of alien faces. Your Majesty, David began with formal courtesy, thank you for accepting our communication request. Speak your terms, the Emperor replied through gritted teeth. Actually, before we discuss terms, I think there's something you need to understand about your current situation. David gestured, and the display shifted to show real-time intelligence feeds from across the galaxy. In the past 2 hours, your empire has lost effective control of approximately 70% of its territory. Your remaining loyal forces are concentrated around core Imperial worlds, but they're surrounded by hostile populations with access to detailed intelligence about Imperial defensive capabilities. Admiral Morgoth studied the strategic overview with growing despair. The human assessment was accurate. The Empire's remaining military assets were positioned in a defensive configuration that could prevent immediate conquest of core worlds, but would be completely incapable of projecting power beyond those systems. More importantly, David continued, your biological weapons programs have been completely compromised. Any attempt to deploy those weapons will result in them targeting Imperial species with equal effectiveness. My sister's modifications have been thorough. What do you want? Emperor Valdres Keth demanded. Justice, David replied simply. Complete Imperial withdrawal from all conquered territories. Formal recognition of independence for all species that choose to leave the Imperial Alliance. Unrestricted access to Imperial historical records documenting the treatment of conquered populations, and full accountability for war crimes committed under Imperial authority. The Emperor's laugh was a rumble of pure rage. And in exchange? Your lives, David replied calmly. We're not interested in genocide, Your Majesty. We're interested in ensuring that what happened to conquered species under Imperial rule never happens to anyone else. You think you can dictate terms to the Galactic Empire? David's expression carried the same quiet intensity his parents had shown during their final moments. Your Majesty, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. We're not dictating terms to the Galactic Empire. We're negotiating the surrender, terms for what's left of it. Admiral Morgoth had been studying the tactical displays throughout the conversation, and his analysis painted a grim picture of Imperial prospects. "Sir," he interrupted, "our strategic position is untenable. Even if we could suppress the current rebellions, we lack the resources to maintain long-term occupation of hostile territory. Our logistics networks have been systematically compromised, our intelligence capabilities have been penetrated, and our biological weapons programs are unusable. Admiral, are you suggesting we surrender?" "Sir, I'm suggesting we negotiate a transition of power that preserves what we can of Imperial civilization while accepting the reality of our military defeat." Emperor Valdres Keth's rage finally exploded. The massive ruler swept his arm across the tactical display controls, sending fragments of advanced technology scattered across the war chamber floor. "I will not surrender to inferior species. I will not validate their delusions of equality." David's voice cut through the Emperor's fury with calm finality. "Then, you'll be remembered as the Emperor who destroyed his own people through pride." "Explain." "Your Majesty, you have two choices. You can negotiate a transition that preserves Imperial core worlds as independent systems with guaranteed security, or you can fight a war that will result in the complete destruction of Imperial civilization." "You're threatening genocide?" "No, David replied. I'm explaining the consequences of the choice you're about to make. If you continue trying to maintain Imperial authority through violence, every species in this galaxy will eventually view Imperial peoples as an existential threat to their freedom. They'll respond accordingly." Admiral Morgoth understood the strategic implications immediately. "Sir, he's correct. If we're seen as an irredeemable threat to galactic stability, the other species will have no choice but to eliminate us completely. But if we negotiate a peaceful transition, Imperial core worlds can survive as independent systems." "Survival through submission," the Emperor snarled. "Survival through adaptation," David corrected. "Your Majesty, your ancestors built this empire through conquest and oppression. But conquest requires military superiority, and you no longer possess that. The galaxy has changed, and Imperial civilization needs to change with it." The communication array activated again, this time displaying Admiral Sarah Chun aboard Nexus Station. Her surgical modifications had been reversed, revealing her true human features for the first time in 3 years. "Your Majesty," she said formally, "I'm transmitting the complete biological weapons research database to representatives of every species in the galaxy. They'll be able to verify every claim we've made about Imperial genocidal intentions." "You've stolen Imperial property." "I've documented Imperial war crimes," Sarah corrected. "And I've ensured that the evidence will be preserved regardless of what happens to individual human witnesses." Emperor Valdres Keth stared at the evidence of his empire's dissolution. Everything the humans had predicted was coming to pass with mathematical precision. His rage, his threats, his military responses, all of it was playing out exactly as they had planned. "How long?" he asked quietly. David understood the question. "How long have we been planning this?" "Since first contact with Imperial forces 12 years ago." "How long did we expect it to take?" "Based on our analysis of Imperial psychology and galactic politics, we estimated the complete collapse of Imperial authority would require between 6 months and 2 years after the initial trigger event." "Your parents' execution was the trigger, yes, but not the plan itself. The plan was to create a situation where Imperial authority would be destroyed by the Empire's own responses to resistance." Admiral Morgoth felt a chill of professional admiration for the scope of the human strategy. "They studied us. They understood our psychology better than we understood theirs. They understood that empires always carry the seeds of their own destruction," David agreed. "Imperial authority depends on the belief that resistance is impossible. Once that belief is shattered, the Empire becomes its own worst enemy." Emperor Valdres Keth stood in the ruins of his war chamber, surrounded by displays showing the collapse of 10,000 years of Imperial dominion. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of absolute defeat. "Your terms," he said quietly. David's expression softened slightly. "Complete withdrawal of Imperial forces from all non-core systems. Formal recognition of independence for all seceding species. establishment of a galactic council to prevent future Imperial expansion, and personal accountability for those responsible for war crimes, including myself, including yourself. But accountability doesn't necessarily mean execution, Your Majesty. It means acknowledgement of responsibility and commitment to ensuring these crimes are never repeated. The Emperor looked around the war chamber one last time, seeing the end of everything his civilization had built through conquest and oppression. And if I refuse? Then, in approximately 6 hours, representatives from 43 species will formally declare Imperial core worlds to be threats to galactic stability, requiring immediate neutralization, David replied with quiet finality. Your choice, Your Majesty. Negotiated transition or complete destruction. Emperor Valdresketh closed his eyes and made the decision that would end the Galactic Empire forever. I accept your terms. In the silence that followed, Admiral Morgoth realized he was witnessing the most significant moment in galactic history. 2 humans had died to trigger a revolution that would reshape civilization itself. And somehow, impossibly, it had taken exactly 47 minutes for their deaths to destroy an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10 millennia. The revolution was complete. The galaxy was free. Now came the much harder task of learning how to stay that way. 6 months after the Empire's surrender, David Chun stood in the Memorial Garden on New Geneva Station, watching representatives from 97 species work together to draft the Galactic Accord of Free Peoples. The station had been hastily constructed in neutral space, designed as a symbol of the new cooperative civilization emerging from the ashes of Imperial oppression. The garden itself was a living testament to galactic diversity, plants from dozens of worlds growing together in carefully maintained harmony, their different atmospheric and nutritional requirements balanced through advanced terraforming technology that had been freely shared between species for the first time in galactic history. Sarah Chan approached through the garden paths, her features showing the exhaustion that had become common among the human delegation. The transition from empire to free alliance had required constant negotiation, endless cultural translation, and careful navigation of conflicts that had been suppressed for millennia under imperial rule. How are the accountability proceedings going? David asked as his sister joined him beside a memorial tree that had been grown from Earth soil mixed with samples from every liberated world. Better than expected, worse than hoped, Sarah replied with characteristic honesty. Former Emperor Valdresketh has provided complete testimony about imperial policies, and his cooperation has encouraged other former officials to participate in the truth and reconciliation process. And the resistance to accountability? Sarah's expression darkened slightly. About 30% of former imperial species are struggling with the concept that their leaders committed crimes at all. They see imperial expansion as natural behavior rather than aggressive conquest. But most of them are willing to participate in the healing process. David nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. Changing civilizations required more than military victory. It required fundamental shifts in how entire species understood their place in the galaxy. Any word from the deep surveys? He asked. Aria's exploration fleets have located 17 more species that were completely isolated by imperial policy. Most of them are enthusiastic about joining the Free World Alliance, but 3 of them are requesting continued isolation until they can study galactic civilization more thoroughly. And we're honoring those requests. Of course, Sarah replied with surprise. Self-determination includes the right to determine the pace of contact with galactic civilization. The Nexarian delegation was particularly insistent about that point. David smiled at his sister's surprise. After 30 years of imperial domination, the concept of voluntary association was still revolutionary for many species. The idea that a powerful alliance would respect another species' desire for limited contact required a fundamental rethinking of how interstellar relationships could function. Ambassador THYSS of the Nexarian Collective approached through the garden, her serpentine features showing the satisfaction that had become common among delegates as they witnessed the practical benefits of cooperative governance. The agricultural integration protocols have been approved, she reported with barely contained excitement. 12 species have agreed to share farming techniques and genetic modifications that will increase food security across the alliance by an estimated 40% within 2 years. David felt a moment of profound satisfaction. During the imperial period, technological advancement had been strictly controlled to maintain imperial dependency. The free sharing of knowledge was producing innovations at a pace that amazed even the most optimistic projections. Any concerns about technological disparities creating new forms of inequality? Sarah asked. Surprisingly few, Ambassador THYSS replied. Most species seem to understand that technological advancement benefits everyone when it's freely shared. The competitive model that drove imperial policies is proving to be much less efficient than cooperative development. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Arya's holographic form, materializing in the garden with unusual urgency. The AI's expression showed something that might have been concern. David, Sarah, we have a situation developing in the Outer Rim territories. What kind of situation? David asked, immediately shifting into crisis management mode. 3 former Imperial species have formed what they're calling the Restoration Alliance. They're claiming that the fall of the Empire was the result of human manipulation and alien conspiracy. They're demanding the return of Imperial authority and threatening military action against free worlds that refuse to comply. Sarah exchanged a worried look with her brother. They had known that some former Imperial populations would struggle to accept the new galactic order, but organized resistance had been minimal during the transition period. How serious is the threat? David asked. Militarily, minimal, Arya replied. The Restoration Alliance represents less than 5% of former Imperial territory and has no access to advanced weapon systems. But politically, they're creating exactly the kind of division that could destabilize the Free World Alliance. Ambassador THYSS's scales shifted to concerned purple. Are they claiming the humans engineered the Empire's fall for their own benefit? Essentially, yes. They're arguing that human strategic capabilities demonstrate Imperial-level ambitions, and that the Free World Alliance is simply a more subtle form of human domination. David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the garden's climate controls. This was precisely the kind of suspicion that could destroy the trust that held the Alliance together. What's the Alliance leadership's response? He asked. Mixed, Arya replied. Most species recognize the arguments as desperate propaganda from former Imperial beneficiaries. But some delegates are expressing private concerns about human influence within the Alliance structure. Sarah understood the implications immediately. They're worried that we're too good at strategy, that our success against the Empire proves we're potentially dangerous to galactic freedom. Exactly. The Restoration Alliance is using our own competence as evidence that we're a threat. David walked deeper into the memorial garden, past trees representing species that had been extinct for centuries due to Imperial policies. The irony was bitter. Humanity's greatest strategic success was becoming the foundation for arguments that humans were inherently imperial. What are our options? He asked after several minutes of contemplation. Arya's holographic form flickered with rapid processing. Militarily, we could easily suppress the Restoration Alliance. They lack the resources to pose a genuine threat to Alliance security. But military action would validate their arguments about human imperialism, Sarah completed. Precisely. Any aggressive response would be seen as proof that humans are willing to use force to maintain galactic dominance. Ambassador THYSS moved closer to the human siblings, her expression thoughtful. What if the response didn't come from humans at all? Explain, David requested. The Restoration Alliance's arguments depend on the assumption that other species are incapable of independent action, that they've simply traded imperial domination for human manipulation. If non-human Alliance members respond to the threat independently, it demonstrates the falseness of that assumption. You're suggesting that humans should be completely uninvolved in the response. I'm suggesting that this situation requires the Alliance to prove that it can function without human leadership, Ambassador THYSS replied firmly. Not because humans are untrustworthy, but because the Alliance needs to demonstrate its own independence. Sarah felt a moment of profound loss at the suggestion. After years of leading the resistance against Imperial oppression, stepping back from galactic leadership felt like abandoning the cause they had fought for. Sarah, David said quietly, reading his sister's expression, what did Mom and Dad fight for? Human dominance or galactic freedom? Galactic freedom, she replied immediately. then we need to trust that the Alliance can maintain that freedom without our direct involvement. Arya's processing cycles accelerated as she analyzed the implications. This represents a significant strategic risk. If the Alliance fails to respond effectively to the Restoration Alliance, it could encourage other challenges to the new galactic order. And if we respond effectively, it validates arguments that humans are the real power behind Alliance decisions, David pointed out. Either way, the trust that holds the Alliance together is damaged. Ambassador HFY's scales shifted to determined orange. Then, we need to ensure that the Alliance response is more effective than any human response could have been. Over the following weeks, David and Sarah Chun did something that no successful revolutionary leaders in galactic history had ever done voluntarily. They stepped aside to allow others to lead. Human representatives in Alliance councils shifted to advisory roles, providing information and analysis but avoiding leadership positions in decision-making processes. The response to the Restoration Alliance came from an unexpected coalition led by the Nexarian Collective, supported by former Imperial species who had embraced the principles of cooperative governance. Instead of military action, they implemented a comprehensive information campaign that exposed the Restoration Alliance leadership's personal motivations and their plans to restore the oppressive hierarchies that had benefited them under Imperial rule. More importantly, they demonstrated practical alternatives by establishing direct aid programs for populations in Restoration Alliance territory, showing that Alliance principles offered better living conditions than a return to Imperial policies. The campaign was devastatingly effective. Within 3 months, most of the Restoration Alliance's support had evaporated as their populations chose Alliance membership over restored imperialism. But the most significant result was the demonstration that the Alliance could defend itself without human leadership, that the cooperative principles the humans had fought for could function independently of their strategic capabilities. "How does it feel?" Sarah asked as she and David watched the final Restoration Alliance holdout apply for Alliance membership. "Like we actually succeeded," David replied with satisfaction. "Not at creating human dominance, but at creating something that can survive without us." Arya materialized beside them, her expression showing what might have been pride. The Alliance intelligence networks have detected no significant challenges to cooperative governance anywhere in surveyed space. Political stability indicators are higher than they've been in recorded galactic history. And human integration? Humans are valued members of the Alliance, but not essential ones, which is exactly what your parents hoped for when they planned this revolution. David thought about Marcus and Elena Chun, who had died knowing they would never see the results of their sacrifice. They had gambled everything on the belief that other species would choose freedom if given the opportunity, and that humans could trust those species to maintain that freedom responsibly. Arya began a new memorial project. "I want to create a record of every species that participated in the revolution, every individual who chose freedom over security, every person who proved that cooperation is more powerful than conquest." "Including the humans?" David smiled, looking out at a galaxy where 97 species worked together as equals, where knowledge flowed freely between civilizations, where no single group held the power to oppress others, especially the humans, but not as leaders, as partners. Sarah placed her hand on her brother's shoulder. "Mom and Dad would be proud." "They're still here," David replied, gesturing toward the memorial garden where plants from dozens of worlds grew together in harmony. "They're in every choice to cooperate instead of compete, every decision to share instead of hoard, every moment when someone chooses trust over suspicion." The revolution that had begun with 2 executions had grown into something larger than humanity's desire for freedom. It had become galactic civilization's commitment to ensuring that freedom would never be lost again. In the end, the greatest human achievement wasn't defeating the Empire. It was creating something better and then trusting others to maintain it. 47 minutes had been enough to destroy 10,000 years of oppression. The freedom that followed would last for as long as sentient beings remembered why it mattered. Years later, when historians from across the galaxy studied the revolution that had reshaped civilization itself, they would debate the strategic elements, analyze the political dynamics, and document the technological innovations that had made it possible. But The lesson they would remember was simpler and more profound. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving you can lead, but proving that leadership isn't necessary for others to choose what's right. Marcus and Elena Chun had died as executed rebels. They were remembered as the parents of galactic freedom. And in a universe where 97 species work together as equals, that was exactly the legacy they had hoped to leave.